Don't drink the coffee. The cup is wrong. The words were quieter than the room, and at a wedding for 200 guests, a serving boy is not supposed to be heard. Don't drink the coffee. The cup is wrong. He said it twice, and the second time the coupe stopped, hanging an inch below Nate Calloway's lips. The boy was 10 years old, and his name was Deshaun Foster. He stood at the kitchen pass-through in a small black vest a size too big, a stack of 42 folded wedding programs in his arms. He counts things, and he counts them twice. No one had asked him to speak. No one had asked him anything all night. He was there because his mother, Valerie Foster, was serving the reception for $130 and a bus ride home, and there is nowhere else for a 10-year-old on a Saturday when the sitter cancels at 6 p.m. I have stood in many rooms where the crystal is old and the truth is cheap. I am the one no one seats, the one who counts, who gets counted. Call me the quiet witness. I will tell you the truth about the Calloway wedding, because every adult in that hall was watching the wrong glass. The groom was Nathaniel Calloway, 34, heir to Calloway Shipping, a firm 3 generations old and worth $1.2 billion. He had been sober 4 years, 2 months. So at his own toast he drank black coffee, not champagne, from his grandmother's cup. Every Calloway at the table knew that. That was the whole problem. Across the head table sat his half-brother, Desmond Calloway, 39, in a tuxedo cut sharp as a letter opener. Near the cake stood Renata Voss, 44, the family's event coordinator for 11 years, an earpiece in her left ear, a clipboard against her hip. Between them, on a silver tray, sat 2 identical antique coupes. Only one of them was real, and at the pass-through, a boy with 42 programs. No one at that wedding thought he mattered. That was their first mistake of the night. It would not be their last. The hall is part of how it happened. The reception was at Fairwick Estate, a stone house on a hill 40 minutes north of the city, in a ballroom called Rosewood Hall. There were 200 guests, 22 round tables, 4 chandeliers, and 1 long head table on a low stage. The light was warm, gold, forgiving. It fell on white flowers and polished silver, and on one tray of coupes it fell wrong. There were, if you counted them, 6 people who mattered to what happened, and it is worth the count. Nathaniel Calloway, 4 years sober, 1 lifted cup away from losing that and possibly his life. Desmond Calloway, who would inherit control if his brother collapsed. Renata Voss, who had built the plan and pointed it. Camille Ellison, 31, the bride, who loved Nate and saw none of it. Valerie Foster, serving, and Deshaun Foster, counting. Was 3 of those people held the power in that room, and they filled it with certainty. They had the suits, the timeline, the 30-second speeches. They had a plan 3 weeks in the making, and a Monday deadline no one at the party knew about. Everything in Rosewood Hall, the warm light, the music at 8:40, the 200 clapping guests, was arranged so that one outcome would feel as natural as cake. A groom would lift a cup. He would drink, and every important person would agree it had been a beautiful night. The whole of it was undone by the smallest worker in the building. He carried no law and raised no shout. He carried a habit his grandmother had taught him of counting the small things twice, so none could quietly go missing. Hold on to that. The plan was expensive and exact. The thing that stopped it was a boy who counted 2 cups where there should have been 1, and found a chip that was no longer there. Wife, to understand what Deshaun saw, you have to understand how he saw. He read details. Faces are built to lie. Details have never learned how. He had been at the pass-through since 6:30. He had watched the coupe carried out on a velvet cushion at 8:15, the way you carry a small crown. It was the Calloway toasting cup, and everyone treated it as if it might break if you breathed. While the adults worked, Deshaun folded programs and counted. He counted the coupes on Renata's tray, because he counts everything on a tray. The first time, he counted 2. He thought his eyes had slipped. So he counted again, the way his grandmother, Ada Foster, taught him. Still two identical cups, one toast. That was strange, but strange is not proof. What Deshawn knew about the toasting cup was one small thing, and it was the only thing he needed. It had a chip, a hairline chip on the base, worn smooth by 3 generations of thumbs, low on the foot where the light catches it. Insert. The real coupe on its cushion, tilted to the base. A tiny chip on the foot, its edge worn round and pale, catching one warm bead of light. He knew the chip because he had held the cup at 7 p.m. Valerie had been told to polish it. Her hands were full, so she had let Deshawn dry it, once, carefully, on a clean cloth, and told him twice not to drop it. He had turned it over. He had found the chip with his thumb. He had counted it, the way he counts scars and cracks and missing buttons. 1 chip. Base of the foot. Now the groom lifted a coupe off Renata's tray, and Deshawn looked at its base. He looked for the pale, worn spot low on the foot. It was not there. The base was clean, perfect, new. Deshawn's hands stopped folding. He looked up for the first time all night. The cup on the cushion had a chip. The cup in Nate Calloway's hand did not. 2 cups. 1 chip. A grown man was about to drink from the wrong one. Insert. The coupe in the groom's hand. Base turned to the light. The foot smooth and flawless. No chip. No worn spot. A factory-perfect edge. He looked at Desmond. Desmond was watching Nate's mouth, not the cup. He looked at Renata. Renata was watching the efficient, Diane Holloway, waiting for the cue. No one was watching the base of the glass. No one but the boy with 42 programs. That is the whole secret of these nights. The most dangerous thing in a room is the smallest true thing that everyone important has agreed not to look at. And it is always quiet. You may wonder how a 10-year-old caught what a hall of clever adults did not. The answer is that he was not busy. Every adult in Rosewood Hall had a job that night, and a job is a kind of blindness. It tells your eyes where to point, and more useful to a planner, where not to. Nate Calloway's job was to be happy. He had waited 34 years and 4 sober ones for this night. And a man that glad is not checking the base of a cup. Desmond's job was to smile and watch the mouth. Renata's job was to run the clock, to keep 200 guests moving from salad to speeches to cake, on time, on cue. Camille's job was to be a bride. Each of them was pointed, like a spotlight, at one bright circle. The dark spaces between the lights were where the whole plan lived. Deshawn had no job like that. He had been given the opposite of a job. He had been told to fold programs, stay at the pass-through, and take up no space at all. So his eyes were free. They went, the way water goes, to the low places no one was guarding. To a tray with 2 cups where one belonged. To a base with no chip. The plan was hiding exactly where the important people had agreed there was nothing worth a second look. Does Nathaniel Calloway is worth understanding, because you need to know why a careful man would drink whatever was handed to him. He had spent his 20s drinking, and it had nearly ended him. At 30, he stopped. 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days, counted on a card in his wallet the way Deshawn counts cups. His grandmother, Odette Calloway, had built the toasting tradition. At every Calloway wedding since 1961, the couple drank from her coupe. When Odette died, the cup passed to Nate, the grandson who sat with her at the end. Desmond had wanted it. Desmond had not gotten it. That was one of 100 small wounds Desmond kept in a ledger no one else could read. His brother had a plan that Nate could not see, and Deshawn could not yet prove. It was a simple plan. It fit in 30 seconds. Nate's company, Calloway Shipping, was signing a merger on Monday. A merger that would move control of 51% of the voting shares to Nate's side of the family, for good. If Nate was healthy Monday morning, Desmond became a minor Calloway forever. But there was a clause. If Nate was incapacitated before the signing, Control passed, temporarily, to the next adult Calloway. That was Desmond, and temporarily is all a patient man needs. There was more. 14 months earlier, Desmond had quietly taken out a Keyman life insurance policy on his brother, worth $8 million, naming a holding company Desmond controlled. He had told the board it was prudent. It was prudent if you were planning what Desmond was planning. And there was the drug. Renata Voss had access to it through a clinic that owed her a debt. In coffee, at the dose she measured, it would not kill a healthy man cleanly. It would drop his heart into a bad rhythm 20 minutes after he drank, in front of 200 witnesses, and read to every doctor in the room as a heart that simply quit. A sober man, collapsing, mid-toast, no wound, no poison anyone would think to test for by Monday. So the cup itself had to change. The coffee in Nate's kitchen stayed untouched, watched by a caterer. Renata carried a second coffee, in a steel thermos, in her own bag. She had a duplicate coupe made 3 weeks ago from a photograph, matched to Odette's, down to the gold rim. Down to everything but one thing. You cannot fake 60 years of thumbs, and she could not fake the chip. They had planned for Nate's eyes. They had planned for Camille's, for the officiants, for 200 guests and 8 groomsmen and 3 photographers. They had planned for every important person in Rosewood Hall. They had not planned for a caterer's son who counts things twice. Deshawn's mother was Valerie Foster. She was 36, and she had cleaned and served in houses like this for 14 years, for families who never learned her last name. That night she had told Deshawn the one thing she always told him. We keep our heads down, baby. We get through the shift. We go home. Valerie was working the coffee and dessert station 30 feet from the stage. Her pay for the night was $130. She had counted on it for 2 weeks. In an hour, her son would take up more room than anyone at the wedding. Go back 3 weeks to see how a plan like this gets built in a family that smiles at Sunday dinner. It does not start with a drug. It starts with a debt and a wound. Renata Voss had coordinated Calloway events for 11 years. She was good, precise, invisible in the useful way. She was also $240,000 in debt from a business that had failed in 2023 and a brother's medical bills that had not. Desmond had learned this the way Desmond learned everything, by paying someone to. And a man with a plan does not look for a monster. He looks for a person with a number over their head, and he offers to make the number go away. He offered Renata $500,000, half now, half after Monday. She did not say yes at once. People rarely do to the worst thing they will ever do. She said yes over 9 days, in small pieces, each one easier than the last, the way you walk into cold water. First she agreed only to help him think, then only to look into the cup. Then the duplicate was ordered, and after the duplicate, there was no clean way back. Desmond never raised his voice in those 9 days. That was the trick of him. He spoke of his brother with love. He said the words fair and owed and family. He said Nate had been handed the company and the cup and the good name, while Desmond, older by 5 years, had been handed a smile and a seat below the salt. Half of it was even true. That is what made the other half go down so easy. What Renata told herself, on the 9 nights she could not sleep, was that it would look like a heart, that there would be no blood, no bruise, no cry. A man would set down a cup and slide from his chair, and 200 people would gasp, and paramedics would come, and it would be one more sad thing that happens at weddings. She had built the plan so that no one would ever have to look. She had not built it for a boy whose whole gift was looking. And there was the clock. There is always a clock. Nate's merger signed at 9 a.m. Monday in a conference room 40 miles south, before a notary and the full board of Calloway Shipping. Nate's own lawyer, a sharp woman named Grace Okafor, 48, had every page ready. If Nate walked in Monday, healthy, it was done, and Desmond was a footnote for the rest of his life. If Nate did not walk in, The incapacity clause woke up, and Desmond held the company while everyone grieved. So, the collapse had to happen at the wedding. Saturday night, late enough that the toast was natural, early enough that Monday was close, in front of enough witnesses that no one would ever whisper the word poison, because who poisons a groom in front of 200 people and 3 cameras? It was, Desmond thought, the safest kind of murder, the kind that looks like grief. After Deshawn saw the missing chip, he stayed quiet. Shouting is what you do when you want to be heard once. Deshawn wanted to be right, and being right is quieter than being loud, so he did what he always does. He counted the whole tray again, from the beginning, in order, and this time he counted more than cups. He counted where each thing had come from, because his grandmother, Ada, had taught him that a thing is where it has been as much as what it is. Fact 1. At 6:30, there was one toasting coupe, on a cushion, chipped. He had dried it himself at 7. Fact 2. At 8:15, there were 2 coupes on Renata's tray, identical, and one had no chip. 2 cannot come from 1. A second cup had entered the room between 7 and 8:15, and only a few hands had been near that tray. Insert. 2 coupes side by side on the silver tray. The same gold rim, the same bowl, but 1 foot worn and chipped, 1 foot smooth and new. Fact 3. The coffee. Nate's coffee, all night, had come from the kitchen urn, poured by Valerie, black, into a plain white mug. But the coupe on the stage had been filled from a steel thermos that Renata carried herself at 8:12, turned away from the room. Deshawn had counted that pour. He counts pours. It was the only coffee all night that had not come from the urn. Fact 4, and this is the part the plan never expected anyone to catch. When Renata poured from the thermos, 1 drop had missed the coupe and landed on the white tablecloth. Deshawn saw where, and that drop dried darker and slower than coffee, with a faint ring at its edge, the way sugar water dries, though no one had put sugar in a groom's black coffee in 4 years. Insert. A single dried droplet on white linen, darker than a coffee stain, ringed at its rim, a faint crust where it soaked and dried, too slow. He was 10. The big words stayed out of reach: poison, incapacitate, merger, beneficiary. In his hands were 4 small facts, and every one of them was checkable, and not one of them knew how to lie. A cup that gained a twin, a base that lost its chip, a coffee from the wrong container, a drop that dried wrong. He looked for his mother. Valerie was at the dessert station, 30 feet away, refilling cream. Her back was to the stage. Deshawn knew what she would say. Get back to the programs. Do not point at the family. We keep our heads down. He loved her, and he knew she was right about almost everything. He also knew she was about to be wrong. Why? Because here is what Ada Foster had built into her grandson, on a stoop in July when he was 6. Count it twice, Deshawn. If it's real, it stays the same. If it moves, somebody moved it. You don't have to be loud to be right. You just have to be sure. She had meant his marbles, his coins, the change from the store. She never knew she was teaching him to catch a thing worth $1.2 billion. So Deshawn set down 42 programs on the pass-through shelf, in a neat square, corners aligned. And he walked toward the stage, along the wall, the way he had been taught to move, small and quiet, past 200 guests who did not see him. What carried him toward the stage was certainty. The plain certainty of a boy who has counted a thing twice. What this child had built, folding paper in a corner, was a case, built out of a count, a chip, a thermos, and a drop. None of it the kind of thing you can argue about. 4 true things, none of them able to lie, and none of them needing him to raise his voice. But knowing a thing and saying it are 2 different journeys, and the second is far longer for a serving boy in a room full of powerful strangers. So Deshawn did the only thing left. He waited for the officiant to call the toast, He moved to the groom's elbow, and he got ready to whisper 4 words twice. Here is what matters most about that walk to the stage, and it is the whole engine of this story. To Deshawn, this was a switched family cup and a lie about it, which to a 10-year-old is simply a wrong that ought to be counted and named. He was doing the only thing his grandmother had ever asked of him, which was to refuse to pretend a thing was right when he had counted twice that it was not. And that is how the powerless get through rooms like Rosewood Hall. Not with power. With a rule, carried down from a woman who cleaned other people's floors, that says the world is worth counting, that says a small thing still has a number, that says if you are sure, you are allowed to say so, even here. Renata Voss had 11 years of planning and a $500,000 promise and a clinic that owed her. Deshawn Foster had a rule from a stoop. That night, the rule from the stoop was going to win, and it was not going to be close. People think a gift like Deshawn's is a kind of magic. It is the opposite of magic. It is refusing to look away from a boring thing until the boring thing tells you the truth. It is counting a tray twice when everyone around you has counted it 0 times, because they were sure they already knew. He had been taught to be invisible, and he had turned the lesson into a skill. A child no one looks at gets to look at everyone. Deshawn had spent 4 years in the corners of catered rooms, watching how adults move when they think no one counts. He knew that people carrying a lie hold it away from their body, the way Renata had turned from the room to pour. He knew that a nervous hand checks its own pocket. He had watched Desmond touch the inside of his jacket 3 times in 20 minutes, where a phone or a paper or a promise might sit. Insert. A strip of Deshawn's mental count made real on a program margin. 4 small pencil ticks. 8. 12 pour/2 cups/no chip/drop. Numbered like a clock. In the kitchen, Valerie was living a different kind of watching. No whisper had reached her. She was refilling cream and counting the minutes to the end of the shift. But she had learned, over 14 years and 100 houses, the exact moment a rich room decides something has gone wrong. And she knew the first rule of that moment. They do not look for who is right. They look for who is easiest to blame. And the easiest person to blame in any hall like Rosewood is the woman holding the coffee. Now, so when Valerie turned from the cream station and saw her son walking toward the head table, toward the groom, in front of 200 guests, every cold arithmetic a working mother owns ran at once. If Deshawn embarrassed these people, the $130 was gone. If the $130 was gone, the rent was short. If the woman with the clipboard decided to be cruel about it, the agency might stop sending Valerie out at all. Not one bill. All of them. She set down the cream. She started across the floor, fast and low, to catch her son's arm and pull him back into the safe, small shape that had kept them both fed for 10 years. She was afraid for him. In rooms like that, for people like them, being right had always cost more than being quiet. She had 30 feet to cross. Deshawn had 3. There was a witness Deshawn had already read without meaning to, and it was the bride. Camille Ellison, 31, loved Nate honestly. She was not in the plan. But Camille had noticed, twice that week, that Renata and Desmond stopped talking when she entered a room, and she had told herself it was wedding nerves. She was a person half-guessing a thing she did not want to know. Deshawn had watched her watch them. He filed it, the way he filed everything, in case it turned out to matter. It would, because when the whole night broke open, when the paramedics were waved off and the security office filled and the questions started, it was Camille who did not protect Desmond. She had spent a week not knowing. She had one memory the plan had not counted on, of a duplicate coupe she had glimpsed in Renata's bag on Thursday, and been told was a spare in case. A plan needs everyone near it to agree to look away. Deshawn refused, and his refusal gave one frightened bride permission to stop pretending too. That is the other thing a small brave act does. It spreads. I were so picture Rosewood Hall in the last 30 seconds before it changed. 200 guests, glasses raised. The efficient, Diane Holloway, saying the warm, familiar words. Camille, bright and unknowing, her hand on Nate's arm. Desmond, on his feet, mid-toast, watching his brother's mouth. Renata, by the cake, watching the cup. Valerie 20 feet out now, moving fast. And a 10-year-old at the groom's elbow who had counted 2 cups and 1 missing chip, and 1 wrong pour, and 1 drop dried like sugar. And who knew, with the whole certainty of a boy who deals only in true things, that if that cup reached those lips, something wrong would become permanent. And no one in the hall would ever know why. He had been told his whole short life to take up no space. Every safe instinct he owned said, stay small, stay at the pass-through, let the adults do what adults do. He weighed all of it, in the 2 seconds he had, against one simple fact. He was the only person in the room who had counted the cups. And then Deshaun Foster did the bravest thing a small person can do in a room full of large ones. He decided the truth was worth more than being invisible. He reached up and pulled, once, on a groom's sleeve. Don't drink the coffee. The cup is wrong. When the 4 words landed the second time, 3 things happened at once, and Deshaun saw all 3. Nate Calloway's coupe stopped. That was the thing 200 people noticed, the groom frozen mid-toast with a cup an inch from his mouth. Camille's smile stayed exactly where it was, which is what a smile does in the half-second before the person behind it catches up. And Renata Voss, by the cake, turned her head and looked, for the first time all night, straight at the boy at the groom's elbow. That look lasted less than 1 second. But Deshaun had spent his whole life reading the things that last less than 1 second. In that look there was arithmetic, and no surprise at all. Renata had moved past wondering why a serving boy had spoken. She was already counting how much a serving boy had seen, and that was the moment the night turned. Because until then, Deshaun had been watching them. Now at least one of them was watching him. The safest boy in the building, safe the way a folded program is safe, a thing nobody sees, was safe no longer. Renata had done the same arithmetic Deshaun had done, only backward. She knew the cup had a twin. She knew the boy had been at the pass-through since 6:30, near the tray, near the pour. If he had said the cup is wrong, then he had, perhaps, counted 2 cups. If he had counted 2 cups, then he had, perhaps, seen the thermos, the drop, the base with no chip. She did not know how much he had. She only knew she could not afford to find out in front of 200 guests. So, very quietly, while the officiant's warm voice covered the pause, Renata's hand moved. Not toward the boy. Toward the steel thermos on the service shelf behind the cake, the one object in the room that could hang her. She was going to make it disappear. Deshaun saw the reach. Of course he saw it. He had counted the pour it came from, and he understood, with a cold, small clarity, that the wrong cup was only half the proof, and the other half was 3 feet from a woman who wanted it gone. That is the second clock these nights run on, and here it started to sprint. Not the villain's clock, the one that ended Monday at 9 a.m., the other one. The clock on the evidence. A stopped cup buys you seconds. A thermos on a shelf, a drop on a cloth, a duplicate coupe still warm from a thermos pour. Those buy you seconds, too. And then a careful hand tidies them away, and they are gone. Deshaun had counted cups his whole short life. Now, for the first time, he was counting down. There is a thing that happens to a watched child that never happens to a watched adult. An adult who is watched can decide to be brave. A watched child has to decide it against every lesson he was ever taught, because the lesson was always the same. Be small. Be quiet. Do not make the powerful look at you, because when the powerful look at people who serve them, it ends badly. Renata was counting on exactly that. She had built a career on the certainty that the smallest worker in the corner would look at his own shoes and vanish. "Whose boy is this?" Renata said, and her voice was smooth and kind and carried just far enough. She said it the way you ask about a spill on a carpet. Warm, sorry, already reaching to make it go away. From the floor, Valerie arrived. Every drop of color that had left Renata's face had landed, instead, in hers. "He's mine," Valerie said quickly, both hands out. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Deshawn, come here. Now." She had run 30 feet to say the smallest words she owned. Here is a thing about Valerie's fear. What frightened her was what always came next for women like her, in rooms like this. The blame, the dismissal, the long bus ride home, 2 transfers, 55 minutes, with no pay, and a son who had just learned that speaking up costs you everything you have. "It's all right," Nate Calloway said. But he said it slowly, because his cup was still stopped, and a man 4 years sober has learned to notice the exact second a thing goes wrong. He looked down at the boy. "Why?" he asked, quiet under the music. "Should I not drink this?" Rosewood Hall stayed loud. 200 people kept talking, glasses up, waiting for a toast that had simply paused. Only the head table had gone still. Renata's hand kept moving toward the thermos. Desmond, on his feet, leaned back. A man deciding a small problem would fix itself. And Deshawn Foster, 10 years old, looked up at the groom and did not look away. "Because," he said, "that's not your grandmother's cup. Your cup has a chip on the bottom. This one doesn't. And the coffee in it didn't come from the kitchen. It came from her thermos." He pointed, once, not at Renata's face, at the steel thermos on the shelf behind the cake. Every adult at that table had left the cups uncounted, every one of them. And now a boy had out loud, and a groom was turning his coupe slowly in the light, looking at a base where a chip should have been. Renata Voss stayed perfectly calm. A professional does not panic. She did something more dangerous than panic. She smiled, warm and sad, and reached for the oldest weapon the powerful own against the small. She made the child the problem. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, gentle as a nurse. "Nate, he's a little boy. He's been here since 6. He's tired, and he's bored, and he's made a story. It happens. My niece used to swear the cups in her tea set had names." A soft laugh, aimed at the whole table. "There's a simple mix-up with the glassware, and there's a child's imagination, and I would hate for us to spoil your toast confusing the two." It was very good. She had not called Deshawn a liar. She had called him a child, which in that hall was worse, because it invited every adult to relax back into the comfortable certainty that the smallest worker in the room could not possibly matter. She let her sad smile do the rest, and she took one more small step toward the thermos while she talked, because the whole point of the smile was to buy her hand the time to reach the shelf. Here is where the second clock ran fast. Renata understood something the table did not. She did not need to prove Deshawn wrong. She only needed Nate to hesitate, to laugh, to set the cup down and reach for it again in a minute, after the thermos was capped and gone and the duplicate was just a pretty glass. No one would ever swab. Doubt served her better than any argument could. Doubt was the whole plan. A 10-second laugh at a serving boy was all the murder needed. So she did not argue with the chip. She argued with the boy. "Whose is he again?" she asked, turning to Valerie, but pitched for Nate. "The caterer's? Then perhaps he has been handling things he ought not to. These cups have been out for an hour. A bored child, unsupervised, near the family's glass." She let it hang. She did not finish it. She did not have to. In 12 words, she had turned Deshawn from a witness into a suspect, and Valerie from a mother into a liability. From beside him, Valerie made the sound good people make when powerful ones corner them. Half apology, half plea. "He didn't touch anything he shouldn't, ma'am. I swear it. We'll go. We'll go right now." And she reached for her son's shoulder. In that one reach was 300 years of learning that when the powerful decide you are the problem, the only safety left is to become invisible again, fast, before it costs you the shift and the reference and the rent. But Deshawn did not move under her hand. He looked up at his mother, and then at the smooth, kind woman with the clipboard, and he understood, in the wordless way clever children understand things, exactly what was being done to him. He was being made small on purpose. And a boy who has spent his whole life being told to take up no space knows the exact difference between choosing to be quiet and being erased. "I did handle something," Deshawn said. The table stilled. "I dried his real cup at 7. My mama was told to polish it, and her hands were full, so I dried it, once, on a clean cloth, and I turned it over, and I felt the chip with my thumb, on the bottom of the foot. That's how I know this one's wrong. I already counted the real one. I'm not making it up." He looked straight at Renata. "And the real one's still on the tray in the kitchen. Go count it. It is a rare thing to watch a lie run out of road." Renata's smile did not fall exactly. It simply stopped meaning anything, the way a porch light stays on in a house everyone has already left. Because a story you can wave away, a mix-up you can laugh off, but a second cup, a real one chipped, sitting on a tray 40 feet away where anyone could walk and count it, is a hard object in the world. And an object does not care how small the hand is that points to it. For most of 34 years, Nathaniel Calloway had not really looked at the people who served him. Waiters, drivers, women with coffee urns and their sons in borrowed vests. Money lays a soft gray film over the world, and a happy groom does not scrape it off. But he looked at Deshawn now, and the film came off. "Show me," he said, to the boy, straight past Renata and his brother. "Show me the real cup." Deshawn nodded once. His mother made a small sound, a last plea, but Deshawn walked to the kitchen pass-through on legs that only shook a little, and he came back carrying the cushion in both hands, the way you carry a small crown. On it sat the first coupe. He set it on the white cloth beside the one in Nate's hand. Insert. 2 coupes on white linen, side by side, identical bowls, identical rims. 1 foot worn smooth with a pale chip. 1 foot factory perfect and bare. "This one's yours," Deshawn said, and turned it to the base. "Chip. Right there. Feel it." He turned the other one in his hands. "This one. Nothing. It's new. It came in tonight." He looked up from the cups at last. 2 cups. 1 toast. Somebody made a second one. Now, Nate Calloway set down his cup, the wrong one very carefully, as if it were made of something worse than glass. He picked up his grandmother's coupe. He turned it over. He found the chip with his own thumb on the base of the foot, worn round by 3 generations, exactly where a 10-year-old had said it would be. "Renata," he said, and his voice had changed. "Where did the second cup come from?" "It's a spare, Nate." Renata did not miss a beat. "For a night this important, of course I had a backup made. Standard. Let me take both to the kitchen and sort out which is which, and we'll get your toast back on track." She reached smoothly for the tray. "We can do the toast in 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Deshawn watched those words make Renata's hand eager. 5 minutes was long enough to cap a thermos, pour a duplicate down a drain, and turn a murder back into a pretty glass. The whole point was to get both cups out of the room. "No," said Nate Calloway, and he laid his hand flat over both coupes. "They stay here." He turned back to the boy, and for the first time that night the easy joy in his face gave way to something older and more awake. "You said the coffee came from her thermos. How do you know that?" What happened next was small, and the small things are the ones this whole night turned on. Nate Calloway turned his chair, fully, away from the cake and the toast and 200 waiting guests, and he faced the boy. He was a man who had been served by invisible people his whole life, and for the first time he could remember, he looked at one of them as if he were a person with a name. "What's your name?" he asked. A man like Nate had spent his life asking serving people whose boy or who let you up here. This time, He wanted only the name itself. Deshawn, the boy said. Deshawn Foster. Nate nodded slowly, as if filing it somewhere it would not be lost. Deshawn, how old are you? 10. And you counted this, Nate said, before anyone, at my own wedding, about my own cup. The words came out flat as a statement, a man watching the gray film lift and seeing, underneath it, how close the edge had been. Desmond spoke then for the first time, and he did it well. He granted the boy everything. 2 cups. All right, Nate. Fine. Warm, reasonable, a big brother laying down the sensible view. A rental house double stocks glassware at a 200-seat wedding every weekend of the year. That is an invoice, not a plot. But look where you are standing. His voice dropped, brotherly, urgent. Your bride, your guests, your merger 40 hours out. You want to freeze the whole night and run a laboratory on a coffee cup in front of every partner and photographer in this hall. The story tomorrow won't be the cup. It'll be the groom who lost his nerve at his own toast. He lifted his own glass, easy, and 200 people half lifted with him, and for 1 second the old gravity of the room pulled everyone back toward the comfortable ending. Which cup, Desmond? Nate said quietly. You want me to drink? Which cup should I drink from? And Desmond, who had planned for 3 weeks, who had thought of the doctors and the cameras and the claws and the clock, had not planned for that one small question in front of that one small witness. His glass stopped in the air. Half a second. No more. But Deshawn was watching the things that last half a second, and he saw the exact moment a brother's easy smile ran out of road. The whole head table was holding its breath now, and it is worth sitting inside the shape of that silence, because it is the shape these nights turn on. On one side of the cloth stood everything the world respects. A billion-dollar name, a smooth 11-year professional, a big brother's easy calm. On the other side stood a caterer's son with a borrowed vest and a chip he had felt with his thumb. By every rule that room had ever run on, the contest was hopelessly one-sided, and it should have ended before it began. And yet the heir to Callaway Shipping had just turned his back on the toast and the timeline and the beautiful calm, and asked a serving boy to show him a cup. That is the moment worth remembering out of the whole night, more than the plot, more than the rescue itself. The moment a powerful man decided the truth mattered more than the comfort of the people who looked like him, and turned at his own wedding to listen to the smallest voice in the hall, because that choice is rarer than any plot. Plots are common. A Renata Voss and a Desmond Callaway sit at half the tables in half the rooms, patient and smooth and certain no one small enough will ever be believed. What is rare, what is precious, what actually saves us, is the person who stops, who hears the wrongness of a stopped cup, and instead of drinking to make the discomfort go away, sets it down and says the 3 hardest words a certain kind of man can say. Show me. Explain. I might be wrong. Valerie Foster watched from a step behind her son, and a very specific fear moved through her, ahead of any relief. She had spent 14 years learning that a child who was right in a room like this became a target for it. Every part of her wanted to cross that last step and pull Deshawn back into the small invisible shape that had kept them both alive. And every part of her also understood, watching the groom lean toward her boy, that something was happening she had never once seen in 14 years of shifts. Someone with power was choosing to believe them. She did not trust it. How could she? But she let it happen, and letting it happen was its own kind of courage, the quiet kind that mothers are never thanked for. The thermos, Deshawn said, on the shelf, behind the cake. She poured his coffee from it at 8:12, turned away, and 1 drop missed and landed there. He pointed to the white cloth. It dried dark and slow, with a ring. Coffee doesn't do that. Something in it did. Insert: the dried droplet on the linen and the steel thermos on the shelf, drawn into one frame. The ring at the drop's edge catching the same warm light as the thermos cap. Nate Calloway looked at the drop. Then he looked at the thermos. Then he looked at his brother, and then at Renata. And something in the looking made Renata Voss finally, completely, go pale. "Nobody touched the thermos," Nate said quietly. "Or the cups. Or the cloth." "Nate, this is insane," Desmond began. Easy still, reaching for the old warmth. "You are ruining your own wedding over a—" "Sit down, Desmond." And there was the voice of the man who ran Calloway Shipping, the voice that lived under 4 years of quiet, awake now. Desmond sat down. "I have watched many rooms come apart. I have rarely watched one come apart so fast and say so little. What happened next was slower than a briefcase flying open and justice raining down, and much more certain. That is how the world actually works, and these stories do not lie to you. Nate Calloway did not accuse anyone." He turned to a groomsman he trusted, a doctor named Wesley Grant, 35, and asked him, low, to stand by the thermos and let no one near it. Then he asked the estate's night manager to call 2 numbers. Fairwick Estate had its own small security office, and a head of security named Frank Delgado, 51, ex-police, who had run the cameras on that hall since 2019. There are 2 cups here that should be 1, Nate said, calm as still water. "And a thermos I did not fill, and the woman who filled it would very much like to take it to the kitchen. I'd prefer she didn't, and I'd like whatever your cameras saw of that tray between 7 and 8:15. Renata Voss held still. People like Renata never run. Running is for people who are not sure they will be caught. She simply set down her clipboard, very gently, and stopped talking, which is the smartest thing a cornered planner ever does. Behind the cake, in the steel thermos, was the rest of the coffee, and in the coffee was the dose Renata had measured from a clinic that owed her. On the tray in the kitchen was the duplicate coupe, made 3 weeks ago from a photograph. Perfect, but for the one thing no photograph shows. And on the estate's hard drive was 40 minutes of footage of a service shelf that no one had thought a boy would make anyone watch. Here is how the second clock ran out, the part these stories usually skip, and the part that matters most. Justice was a slow machine, never a lightning bolt, and that night, Nate Calloway simply refused to let anyone unplug it. Frank Delgado arrived at the head table in 4 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He had 22 years of standing quietly near expensive people while they behaved badly. He took one look at 2 identical cups with 1 chip between them, at a drop on the cloth, at a woman standing too still beside a thermos, and he made the calls a man in his job knows how to make. He kept the cups. He kept the thermos. He kept the cloth. He walked Renata Voss to the small office off the lobby, not roughly, just certainly, and he closed the door. The estate's cameras did the rest. There was one mounted over the service corridor that covered the shelf behind the cake. It had recorded Renata at 8:11, alone, uncapping a steel thermos, filling a coupe with her body turned to block the lens. It had recorded her at 8:12, lifting a second, identical coupe out of her own bag. It had recorded, at 7:55, the moment the duplicate first came out of that bag at all. She had planned for 200 pairs of human eyes. She had not planned for the one glass eye that never blinks and never gets bored. While they waited, Rosewood Hall did something the powerful rarely see. It reversed. For an hour, all the standing in that room had belonged to the man with the billion-dollar name and the woman with the clipboard, and the caterer and her son had been furniture. Now Nate Calloway stood, a 34-year-old groom in a tuxedo, and put himself, on purpose, between his own brother and the door. "You'll wait for the police, Desmond," he said, "or you'll wait for the toxicology. But you are not walking out of my wedding tonight." A county sheriff's deputy arrived at 9:40 and took the thermos, both cups, and the cloth into evidence. each in its own sealed bag, logged and numbered. A state lab confirmed 6 days later what a 10-year-old had counted in 2 seconds. The coffee in the thermos held a measured dose of a heart drug that had no business in a sober man's cup. The duplicate coupe carried the drug's residue on its rim. The real coupe, chipped, carried nothing but Nate's own kitchen coffee. The drop on the cloth matched the thermos exactly. And then a quieter machine started, the kind that runs on paper. Grace Okafor, Nate's lawyer, 48, pulled the incapacity clause and the Keyman insurance policy Desmond had taken out 14 months before, worth $8 million, and laid them beside a wedding where Desmond's own coordinator had poured a heart drug into his brother's cup 40 hours before a merger. Motive, means, and a Monday deadline in one tidy stack. Desmond Calloway had built a plan so clever it explained itself the moment anyone was allowed to look. The head table did not stay calm after the deputy read the label. Camille Ellison put her hand over her mouth, and then she did the bravest thing she had in her. She told Frank Delgado about the spare cup she had glimpsed in Renata's bag on Thursday and been told to forget. Desmond reached once for the old warmth, for the words, brother, and misunderstanding. Nate looked at him for a long moment and said only, "You had a policy on me, Desmond. Wesley found it in the filing 2 weeks ago, and I told him he was being paranoid." Desmond had nowhere left to take the smile. The rest happened away from Rosewood Hall, the way the important things usually do. There were people whose work it is to charge a man who buys a murder from a woman in debt. There were people whose work it is to unwind an $8 million policy taken out by the person who meant to collect it. It took 11 months. It was slow and boring and thorough, and Deshaun Foster never had to see any of it. Because that is the other rule these nights keep. The child is never in danger. His gift is that he counted. His reward is that he gets to go back to being 10. He was driven home that night at 10:30, in a warm car, with a plate of wedding cake he had not been allowed to touch all evening, and the right to wake up the next morning and still just be a boy. You may want to know what became of them, and here it is plainly, because these stories do not pretend the wicked simply vanish. They do not vanish. They are dismantled, slowly, by the boring machinery they thought they were too clever to fear. Renata Voss learned what many learn too late, that a partner in a crime is loyal only until the crime fails. She had sold 11 years of a clean name for $500,000 she never collected, and a debt of $240,000 that did not go away. And she talked to the deputies within a week because talking was the only thing left that could shorten what was coming. She pleaded to conspiracy and lost her license to coordinate so much as a birthday. The clinic that had owed her a favor was closed by the state before the season changed. Desmond Calloway discovered that the incapacity clause he had built his whole plan around cut the other way, when the incapacity never came. The board of Calloway Shipping did not wait for a verdict to act. They voted him off in a single afternoon. The $8 million policy he had taken out on his brother became the clearest page in the prosecutor's file, the exact document that turned a family tragedy into premeditation. He had spent 3 weeks and every ounce of a big brother's charm, and it had all been undone by a caterer's son with a borrowed pen and a rule from a stoop. The merger signed on Monday at 9 a.m., on time, with Nate Calloway healthy at the head of the table and Grace Okafor at his right hand. 51% of the voting shares moved to Nate's side of the family for good. Desmond was a footnote by lunch. The safest kind of murder, the one that looks like grief, had failed because one person in a hall of 200 refused to stop looking. Nate Calloway sat a long time at the great table the morning after. Married and alive, both by 4 words a boy had whispered twice. He was 34, and he had almost drunk his own death from a stranger's cup at his own wedding, and been saved by a child he had not thought to look at, in a room he thought he understood. Then he did the thing that tells you who a man really is. He drove himself to the small apartment where Valerie Foster was already back at the kitchen table at 8 a.m., scanning the job board, certain the agency had heard some version of the night and would never send her out again. He came with no toy and no check to wave the strangeness away. "Mrs. Foster," he said, and he used her name, which no one at Fairwick Estate had done all night. "Your son has a rare and serious mind. I would like to make sure the world never gets the chance to waste it." He made Valerie an offer she could look her son in the eye and accept, an offer with no servant's bonus anywhere in it, a permanent position, salaried, running hospitality for Callaway Shipping, $78,000 a year with her full name on the contract, so she never again had to count out a lost $130 shift against the rent. A trust for Deshawn's schooling, any school he could earn his way into, from that September until the day he stopped wanting to learn, and the deposit and the first year on an apartment where her son had his own room and a door that locked. And he asked for one thing in return, which was not really a thing at all. He asked that Deshawn be allowed to keep counting, to count cups and coins and cracks and cars and anything else that held still long enough. Because a boy who counts the small things twice, Nate said, should never again be told to take up less space. Valerie Foster cried then, quietly, the way strong people cry when the fear finally has somewhere to go. And Deshawn, who did not fully understand what had changed, understood the only part that mattered. His mother was not afraid anymore. I went back, in the way I go back to these houses, 4 months later, to see what the truth had built. Deshawn had his own room now, and on the wall he had taped a single wedding program, the back covered in a careful pen map, 2 cups, 1 thermos, an X on a drop, 6 figures numbered in the corner. He had asked to keep a copy. Frank Delgado had made him one. Deshawn went to a school that did not, at first, know what to make of him. This quiet boy, who counted things twice, and did not read faces, and saw everything. But there was a teacher there, a woman named Grace Adeyemi, near retiring, who knew the gift for what it was. She told him the thing Nate Callaway had paid to make sure he would always hear. That the world is full of rooms where everyone important has agreed not to see one small true thing. And that the people who count, and who are brave enough to whisper, are not a nuisance in the corner. They are, quietly, how the rest of us are saved. And Nate Callaway, who had almost filled the emptiest 2 seconds of his life with a stranger's poison, kept one thing on the wall of his office at Callaway Shipping. He framed a photograph of 2 identical cups on white linen, one with a chip and one without. He kept it, he said, to remind himself of the one lesson a rich man is almost never taught, that the truth is usually being counted for you by someone you have decided does not count. So here is the truth promised at the start, and it is the reason rooms like Rosewood Hall are worth watching at all. The most dangerous threats wear familiar faces. They rarely arrive as strangers. They stand up at our weddings. They know our habits, the coffee we drink and the cup we drink it from, and they price the exact 2 seconds when we are too happy to look, and the people who save us are the ones we handed the programs to, almost never the ones we seated at the table, the ones we told to take up less space, standing at the pass-through, counting the small true things the rest of us agreed not to see. Deshawn Foster is 10 years old. He could not stop a poisoning with money or power or a loud, clever speech. He stopped it with a count of 2, a missing chip, a wrong thermos, and a drop dried like sugar. Never ever underestimate the difference one quiet, watching child can make. Here is one small instruction, and it costs nothing, and it may one day matter more than anything else in this whole story. The next time you are in a room where everyone important agrees that everything is fine, find the person no one is looking at. The quiet one in the corner, the one you told to take up no space. Then look where they are looking, because more often than the powerful will ever admit, the truth is standing exactly there, small and patient and unguarded, waiting for one brave voice to say it out loud. If this reminded you of someone whose gift the world has not seen yet, send it to them. And ask yourself, honestly, would you have set the cup down? This is a dramatized story. Names, characters, and events are fictional, created for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is coincidental.